additional participants are trying to sign on. So thanks a lot for being the early birds on time, and we'll get started in just 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you are in the world joining us. Thank you so much for participating and having interest in this webinar today. I am very happy to welcome you to this Gecko webinar. This is the 10th webinar in a series. I hope that some of you have joined us before, and I'm sure that there are newcomers. So please bear with a few minutes of introductions and housekeepings, and then I will be very pleased to introduce you to our extraordinary lineup of speakers today. This is our first Gecko webinar of this new year. Happy New Year to all of you. The next webinar, you can mark your calendars tentatively, will be on women and girls in STEM, and it will be scheduled for the last week in February. So we will be sending out more information on that very soon. My name is Kate Oren. I'm a senior officer with the IUCN Global Gender Team. I am standing in this morning for my dear colleague Ana Rojas, who is our energy lead extraordinaire at IUCN GGO. She sends her regrets. She had a conflict that she could not escape, and here I am, hopefully somehow ably facilitating this conversation today. I would like to introduce and thank two colleagues who are running the show behind the scenes. Maria Preble, who is Anna's really right-hand woman, supporting all of our energy work, and Maggie Roth, who I was going to say this until the end, but I'm going to say it right now. Our Maggie Roth, our extraordinary, inimitable colleague, today is her last day, and we want to thank her so much for joining this last Gecko webinar that she was so integral in organizing. I want to thank all of the participants for joining, and especially our panelists for being on board for this discussion. I was telling them this morning that when Ana asked me to step in for her, I had to laugh because I had actually registered for this webinar. I was very excited to see the presentations, so here I am up close and personal. I want to thank USAID for their support. USAID and IUCN are organizing this webinar under the auspices of Gecko, which I will introduce momentarily. Before I do that, I want to go through a couple of important virtual housekeeping matters, if you will. All participants will be kept in the mute function throughout this webinar. This is only to limit connectivity issues, any disruptions with background noises, etc. However, everyone is very much welcome to participate in these discussions throughout. And I would like to draw your attention to your control panel, probably at the right-hand side of your screen, and two particular functions, the questions and the chat box. If you have any issues with connectivity, you are welcome to send a message via chat. You can also email Maria Preble directly or Maggie Roth. You should have their emails from the webinar confirmation emails. And most importantly, please share your questions and comments. You can do that specifically through the questions box. We will be watching this closely throughout the webinar, so please feel free to make a note of your questions as you're listening or save them till the end. It doesn't matter. We'll be reviewing and trying to get to as many of the questions as we can, saving about 20 to 30 minutes for the questions and answers at the end of the discussion. There are also handouts available that some of the panelists have provided, that we from IUCN GGO have provided, some Gecko materials. They are also available at the right-hand side of your screen. And I'd like to make you aware that this video, all of the webinars are recorded, and all of the presentations will be available online. I'd like to introduce you to our GREEN platform, if you are not familiar with it already, GREEN platform. The platform is a platform of resources, discussions, etc., an extensive array of materials, and you can reach the GREEN platform at genderandenvironment.org/energy. Very briefly, again, the structure of this webinar will be about an hour of presentation, saving the last half hour or so for questions and answers. So as I mentioned, this webinar is one in a series, and it is organized under the auspices of the Gecko Initiative. Gecko is a 5-year project launched between IUCN and USAID and IUCN in 2014. mainly focused around the opportunity to leverage advancements in women's empowerment and gender equality through and for the benefit of climate change and development outcomes. There is a wide scope of work under the Gecko Initiative, but Gecko's energy work is a huge portion of this endeavor. Gecko's energy portfolio supports the energy sector and the mitigation sector in particular to be gender responsive by filling knowledge gaps for integrating gender into the sector through sharing of best practices and encouraging documentation of experiences and new knowledge. So the topic for this webinar today, how gender methodologies can support nationally determined contributions. Gender mainstreaming in the energy sector is taking place at many levels in many shapes, from national policies to institutional reforms and project development, increasing energy access and providing low-emission development pathways for many around the world. Gender has been a central pillar of the commitments towards achieving universal access to modern energy and is recognized as the cornerstone within the Sustainable Development Goals. Indeed, a focus on gender will make meeting the SDG 7 targets almost impossible. The last 2 years in particular have seen an important shift towards increasing gender mainstreaming in mitigation initiatives. As of April 2016, 40% of INDCs, for example, included references to women and gender. There is a growing recognition that gender-responsive methodologies can support the implementation of climate actions, including mitigation initiatives as showcased, for example, in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change's technical paper on gender methodologies. And most recently, the COP22 gender decision, which we'll hear more about today, which agreed the extension and strengthening of the Lima Work Program on gender, open various opportunities, for example, requesting the UNFCCC Secretariat to produce a technical paper identifying entry points for integrating gender in the respective work streams of the UNFCCC, requesting the financial mechanism to report on integration of a gender perspective in its operating entities, and requesting the further development of a gender action plan to support the implementation of decisions and mandates under the UNFCCC sphere. With energy production and consumption accounting for 2/3 of greenhouse gas emissions, relying on low carbon energy sources, renewable energy options, and energy efficiency will be necessary to achieve both environmental protection and support the achievement of socioeconomic goals, including gender equality. Experiences have shown that gender-responsive methodologies can contribute to both designing efficient interventions while increasing women's access to modern energy and improved economic benefits. At a moment in time when countries are moving from intended, VI, to actual determined contributions, understanding how these methodologies can be utilized to improve policy and project development is key. So our framing questions for today, for the presentations and the discussion to follow, are these. First of all, why have we dropped this I from the NDCs, the intended, and what are the expected mechanisms to be used for ensuring the implementation? How about benefits or co-benefits? What is the role that benefits or co-benefit generation, including, maybe especially, the achievement of gender equality, is taking in the development of international climate change policies and instruments? What lessons can be drawn from gender-responsive processes that can be replicated by others in the development of their energy interventions? And what can we learn from climate change policy processes that have effectively addressed and integrated gender equality? As I said, we are joined by an amazing panel. We will have 3 speakers today. Natalie Harms from IUCN, the Energy Research Center of the Netherlands. I will introduce each of the speakers in just a moment before they each take the stage, so to speak. Eric Zussman from the Institute for Global Environmental Studies in Japan, and Carmen Arias from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Peru. Finally, Gecko Energy is open to all. The green platform works because of everyone's participation. Women and men of all, across all sectors, working on all issues at all levels are welcome to join. If you are looking for specific information, specific materials, specific resources, please do not hesitate to reach out. Ana Rojas is the lead in this effort. Her email is in the middle, and her support, Maria Preble. Her contact information is to the left, and we have Maggie Roth's contact information here, but of course today is her last day and we will miss her terribly. Finally, the address for the green platform is at the bottom of your screen. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Natalie Harms, who will be discussing NDCs and the implementation tools shaping the post-Paris scenario. As we switch screens here, I am going to just read a bit of her bio, although she has so much experience I can't capture it all. Natalie focuses on integrating sustainable development and climate change targets and planning in low-emission pathways. In 2016, she chaired the Benefits Working Group of the LEDS Global Partnership that supports policymakers and practitioners in identifying and communicating social, economic, and environmental benefits of clean development pathways. Currently working as a researcher and policy advisor at IUCN, Energy Research Center of the Netherlands, working on designing and implementing NAMAs, NDCs or NDCs, and low-emission pathways in developing countries. Natalie has extensive experience with other agencies, including GIZ and Asian Development Bank, and in just a few weeks, I understand she will be taking up a new post working on sustainable development strategies in Asia and the Pacific at UNSCAP in Bangkok. Before I give you the floor, Natalie, I just want to remind everyone to please keep track of your questions. Please feel free to share them as we go in the comment box or save them to the end. And I will say at the outset that I will be asking all of the speakers for one key takeaway message at the end. So think about that, speakers, as you're listening to the conversation. Thank you all so much for joining. And Natalie, if you are ready, I will give you the floor.
Great, thanks so much for the introduction, Kate. I hope that you can already see my screen. One second, I'll try it again. Can you see it now? Just let me know quickly.
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. All right. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for the introduction, Kate. What I will be talking about today is, as she already mentioned, NDCs and the implementation tools that we are looking at the moment, now shaping the post-Paris scenario. So what I'll do is give a very quick introduction on what the LEDS GP is and the Benefits Working Group that I was fortunate enough to chair last year, and then have look at sort of the background of the climate change landscape that we are in now, what the Paris Agreement is, what the gap is that we still need to close, what the NDC cycle looks like, and then have a look at where we are moving towards when we talk about implementation. So what are elements of implementation, steps to implement NDCs, and most importantly, how to align NDCs with sustainable development goals or sustainable development and also gender equality. But more generally, I will be speaking about this from sort of a strategic perspective of where we are now and where we should and want to be heading in the future. Here we go. So very briefly on the LEDS GP. The LEDS GP is the Low Emission Development Strategies Global Partnership, and that's a large network of over 160 countries and organizations, and it's led by the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, CDKN. It has 3 regional platforms and a number of working groups, and I co-chaired the Benefits Working Group last year, which looks specifically at how to align sustainable development and climate change strategies. So that looks also at gender equality, but also other economic and social and environmental benefits that go beyond greenhouse gas emission reduction. That just as my quick background. And let's jump straight into it. I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with the Paris Agreement, but because we have a very mixed audience, I'll sort of start from the beginning. In December 2015, as most of you will know, parties to the UNFCCC convened in Paris and adopted the Paris Agreement. And what is important to know about the Paris Agreement is that it sets a top-down collective goal and at the same time also asks each country to determine their individual contribution to reaching this goal. So the collective goal is that the Paris Agreement commits expects all nations to keep global temperature rise well below 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels, and also to pursue all efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And in the months running up to the Paris conference, countries were invited to submit their roadmaps, or what is called intended nationally determined contributions, INDCs, to show how they will reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to meet these goals. And at the moment, many have already been converted into NDCs, and they're still being submitted. But basically, countries will be asked to continually put forward these individual efforts on how to reach the collective goals in the form of nationally determined contributions. So that's the NDCs, as Kate already mentioned earlier. Very important to note that, because this is a webinar that looks at gender equality, that the Paris Agreement recognizes and acknowledges gender equality and also women empowerment as a very important cross-cutting goal that will be, necessary to keep in mind if we want to combat climate change, as it is so cross-sectoral in nature. And also, as Kate has already spoken about a little bit, gender equality has become quite a big topic now in the UNFCCC process, and there are a lot of things going on there. We've come quite far over the past few years, but I will now focus on NDCs and the Paris Agreement to give you more of a background there, and what this means maybe for sustainable development and also gender equality. So the Paris Agreement also sets out the need for finance. It differentiates between developed and developing countries, meaning that developed countries will still have to lead this reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and support developing countries in enhancing their efforts to also contribute to this global goal. And it calls for a greenhouse gas emissions peak and develops a review mechanism, which I will talk about in a minute. And so far, 126 parties have ratified the Paris Agreement, and it has entered into force in November in 2016. So for the first time, this is an agreement that sort of brings all nations into this sort of common cause, and they all take ambitious action to combat climate change and also to adapt to its effects. However, if we have a look at the current policies and what has been pledged so far, and I think that a lot of you have maybe seen this graph before, that shows us that if we only look at policies that already exist to reduce emissions, these would lead in the future to a roughly like a 3.6 degree warming above pre-industrial levels. So that is far off of the goal that the Paris Agreement sets. And even if we look at the INDCs, the unconditional pledges, and also the NDCs, at least those that had been submitted until November last year, we would still miss this goal, and we would only be able to limit warming to around 2.8 or even above 3 degrees. So there remains a substantial gap between what governments have promised to do and also the level of action that they have taken up till now. At the same time, we know that the longer we wait, the more expensive clean pathways may become. So with every year, every decade lost, the technical challenges and the costs will rise. At the moment, it is still feasible to reach this pathway, so immediate action is necessary, and there are also quite a few co-benefits, such as gender equality, to be had, and I'll come to that again a little bit later. So if we look at this NDC cycle, what this means is that to reach these global goals, we need to continually increase ambition and ensure our progress towards limiting temperature rise. And what the Paris Agreement sets out is a cycle of 5-year cycle of NDCs and also long-term mid-century development strategies, and an enhanced transparency framework and a global stocktake. So what this means is that there will be a mandatory cycle in which parties need to submit new or updated NDCs every 5 years, starting in 2020. So this NDC development and conversion process is ongoing to reach these global goals. And at the same time, countries are also requested to communicate long-term strategies by 2020 that keep in mind the long-term goals. The agreement also establishes an enhanced transparency framework with a common reporting and review requirement for all parties. And in 2018, there will be a facilitative dialogue to assess progress and inform the next round of NDCs in 2020. And from 2023, there will be a global stocktake every 5 years to encourage ambitious action and that we review our progress towards meeting our goal. So in this initial period, this is a period, an opportunity for learning lessons from how to convert these intended or pledged commitments into actual implementation, and to ensure that what we are pledging will be enough to reach our goals. So this is a good time to really exchange on our lessons learned and on how to put into place the right policy frameworks and create the right enabling environments, which is quite a big task for most countries. Let's move on and have a quick look at the different elements of implementation that I just mentioned. So there is a collective goal and there are individual efforts, like I said. And these individual efforts are the NDCs. These longer-term strategies, the long-term mid-century strategies that I mentioned, they're based on a concept called low-emission development strategies. That have been around for a while. And the idea there is to decouple economic growth and development from emissions growth. Now, what the opportunity here is that this may help us to align these three different elements. So this global target and a long-term strategy on the national level, plus sort of short and mid-term actions on the domestic level that are NDCs and other domestic actions. So in this sense, these long-term strategies can guide NDC development. They can be sort of a frame for investment as well. And NDCs are envisaged as economy-wide plans, or at least in the future, and they need to continually increase ambition on both mitigation and adaptation. Now, these targets can and should align with other economic plans and social and environmental plans and targets, such as increasing gender equality. And there can be specific elements onto how to achieve these NDCs. And that can be through NAMAs, nationally appropriate mitigation actions, but also other domestic mitigation actions, as well as national adaptation plans and actions and other measures that might not be labeled in such a way, but that contribute to reducing emissions, such as policies or projects or programs like building a bus rapid transport system. And these plans and projects should also keep in mind these co-benefits that can be had, and to keep in mind this sort of long-term strategy. That is the idea behind this. Very important is to integrate these NDCs into these wider national development plans that link economic growth and poverty alleviation. Let's move ahead. We can't look at all of this in detail, but a few steps to implement NDCs. This is a continuous cycle, as I mentioned. So if we talk about preparing NDC implementation planning, which we will continue to look at this every couple of years, what is important here, for instance, is to strengthen institutional arrangements, to arrange for cross-ministerial coordination, especially because there are a lot of cross-sectoral topics that are important here, but also technical preparations. When we look at how to develop an implementation plan, it's important to prioritize different mitigation and adaptation measures that are also consolidated with economic growth and development targets. Very important is to continually engage stakeholders across society, so this includes women's groups and other actors. And to implement NDCs, this means that we need to enable the conditions. So this also includes passing laws and adopting regulations that allow these different actors and ministries to work together, and also to develop the right monitoring systems, as there will be a review process. So this is a cycle that I can't go into detail here now, but I will show you where you can find more information on this. Very briefly, how to align NDCs and sustainable development now that we know that we're all facing these common challenges of having to build awareness, build capacity, coordinate across ministries, create short-term and long-term plans to meet this, this collective goal. What is the opportunity here for sustainable development and also for gender equality more specifically? That is that NDC implementation, or NDCs themselves, they can provide a bridge between sort of the Paris Agreement and things like the Agenda 2030 on sustainable development, because there are significant opportunities here to when we develop these long-term strategies to integrate them into wider development and social policy and countries' economic development plans, there's an opportunity for win-win actions that deliver economic and social benefits as well as climate benefits. So when countries are setting up these policy making processes and this sort of blueprint for national implementation of both sustainable development goals and climate change goals, there's an opportunity here to lay out different pathways, right? So depending on which action you choose, which technologies you want to invest in, what targets you set in your NDCs and also in your long-term strategy, you could build a pathway or choose a pathway that reduces emissions but also at the same time maybe increases health substantially because it is maybe includes transport measures that reduce air pollution, but at the same time maybe this pathway might not lead to high job creation. You might choose a pathway that maybe has lower emission reduction but much higher job creation and also increases gender equality. And so depending on how countries will want to prioritize different actions, there are many more impacts beyond sort of climate change goals directly that can be had from this. And this is both the challenge but also the opportunity that we face at the moment with NDCs and the climate change landscape that we are in now. And I think I've already gone over my time, so I might actually just cut it here now. If there are any more questions regarding the Agenda 2030, I can come back to that later. Otherwise, I would invite everyone to go ahead and have a look at the LEDS-GP website. We also developed a LEDS in Practice series that looks at different things like gender equality, but also how to create green jobs and so forth. So all of these sort of win-win actions that we can gain from. And if you want to learn more about the NDC cycle and different support programs and everything that is happening at the moment, there is also a separate UNFCCC webinar series that you can have a look at. And for general information, one good source is always the Mitigation Partnership website if you want to learn more about these different tools and mechanisms, which unfortunately I don't have a lot of time to go into in detail, but I hope this has helped to maybe set the scene a little bit for the next presenter who will go into more detail. Thank you.
Oh, that more than sets the scene, I think. Thank you so much, Natalie. That was fantastic. I'm making notes to myself, and I know I will refer back to that NDC cycle slide, especially several times myself. That was wonderful. I hope we also do have some questions that people are thinking of, and I hope we have time to come back to discussing more of those interlinkages, intersections with the 2030 agenda. Really interesting. I am going to introduce our next speaker momentarily, but I've been watching some newcomers signing on over the course of this first presentation, so I just want to take a second to welcome you. We are so glad to have so many people. We have an incredible participant list. We're so glad to have all of you on this webinar. I'm about to introduce the second speaker, and that was Natalie Harms from IUCN. So Eric, while you are getting your screen set up, I am going to read a little bit of your bio. Eric Zussman is Senior Policy Researcher and Area Leader at the Institute for Global Environmental Studies in Hayama, Japan. For much of the past decade, Eric has worked on the co-benefits of climate policies in developing Asia. He recently contributed to an Asian Development Bank project called Harnessing Climate Change Mitigation Initiatives to Benefit Women that drew upon his specific knowledge of co-benefits. So Eric, we are so glad to have you and learn from you this morning, or I think it's quite evening for you, and the floor is yours when you're ready.
Okay, thanks so much, Kate. I really appreciate that, and thanks a lot, Natalie, for providing a really nice framing that will that'll hopefully complement some of the points that I'm raising in here as well. And hello, everybody out there, or good evening from Japan. I'm going to start by just giving a brief introduction to how I'm going to touch upon or cover this topic, and that's with this slide that that discusses or that notes that we're participating in an ADB project that aims to give more attention to gender and mitigation actions. And what I want to highlight here really is when we started this ADB project 4 years ago, the very notion of gender and mitigation was still relatively new. Although gender and climate had been receiving a lot more attention in UNFCCC circles, the mitigation aspects had been receiving relatively less attention. And what this slide really shows you at the bottom here is the number of references to different co-benefits or sustainable development concerns that have been raised during the CDM. And what the slide is trying to show, or what the figure is trying to show, is that for many of the concerns that are related to sustainable development, actually the CDM had paid attention to many economic concerns, many environmental concerns, but out of the approximately 4,000 projects that have been surveyed for this report in 2012, only 5 of the projects explicitly mentioned a reference between, in this case, mitigation and gender. And so this idea of linking gender and mitigation was extremely important, but hadn't received all that much attention, and had not received all that much attention in UNFCCC circles, and not received that much attention by project developers, people that deal with carbon finance. Although, as has been already mentioned, things have changed dramatically over the past few years, and especially recently with the Paris Agreement and with some of the follow-up decisions in Marrakesh. And one of the things that we see happening now is not only a greater emphasis on the linkages between climate and gender, but different ways of approaching this issue that also align nicely with some of the work that we've been doing as part of our ADB project. And the way that things have been moving, this sort of reorientation or transformation, is really to what I would suggest to as sort of a more multi-level, multi-stakeholder approach. And what I mean by that is rather than just focusing on one single entry point as a way that women or gender stakeholders can get involved in mitigation actions, it's focusing on multiple entry points and in a sort of layered approach. So there's a sort of reinforcing or reinforcement between these different levels so that you can get not just, for instance, one good bus rapid transit project that takes into consideration gender, but multiple projects that are gender sensitive, or not just one good solar project that takes into consideration gender, but multiple projects that are not just about the project themselves, but also about manufacturing solar technology, and making sure people can market solar technology, and making sure that this is done in a gender-equitable and gender-responsive fashion. So the way that our project, this ADB project, was set up also had this sort of multi-level approach, and that is we had sort of 3 different levels of activities. One was focused on institutional capacity building, a second was focused on policy mainstreaming, and the third was focused on pilot projects. And we did this in 3 separate countries. In each of the 3 countries, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos PDR, we worked with different agencies, we worked on different policies, and we had different pilot projects, but the structure was sort of common throughout. And this just gives you an example of the pilot projects that we worked on. This was in Cambodia, and it was an advanced cook stove project. And as mentioned previously, we tried to make sure that gender was integrated throughout the value chain of this project, so that the advanced cook stoves, in this case, were not just being sold to try to help make it easier for women who are using the cook stoves to breathe easier, and not just being sold in the way to reduce the amount of biomass that was being burnt. But it was also, they were also sold by women who were trained to market the stoves, and then also given financial skills that could be then used for other purposes throughout the community. And this was just one example of the pilot project that we worked on in Cambodia. In the case of Vietnam, where we worked on a biogas project, in that case, then the women were actually trained to work as masons to help manufacture some of the facilities, the biodigesters that were used to manufacture the biogas. Okay, so we have these pilot projects where we were integrating gender. And then the other two pieces, the institutional capacity building and the policy mainstreaming, were, I would suggest, just as important. And the project went on for 4 years, and over that 4-year period, we really got a chance to build strong relationships with many of the people that were working in ministries that were receiving this capacity building. And so, for instance, this picture right here shows a woman from the Gender and Children's Working Group in the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestries, and Fisheries in Cambodia. And you can see on the flip chart right there, I mean, she's writing responses to questions that were used to generate a concept note for Green Climate Fund funding. And so what we did is we worked with both women and men that were representing gender interests and helped build them capacities and skills and knowledge and confidences to be able to talk about things like NAMAs and NDCs, so that in the case of, for instance, this Gender and Children's Working Group, they could then go work with the technical working group on climate change in their own ministry and push for the inclusion of gender into action plans within their own ministry. And then that would also feed its way into requests for funding and feed its way into things like the NDCs. Similarly, in the case of Lao, we worked with both the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment and the folks that worked on their mitigation actions, but we did that in collaboration with the Lao Women's Union, which is a government agency that works on women's issues. And at the same time, we built capacities for both of them to work together. And now the Lao Women's Union has a formal seat on the technical working group on climate change in Lao PDR. Now, one of the things that happened from this capacity building is we not only learned how to build capacity, but we learned a lot about what are some of the needs out there to try to replicate this approach or to try to do similar types of things in other countries. And as we were learning, we realized that it would be extremely valuable to generate knowledge products that could help generalize some of the things that we did and spread and disseminate some of those things. And I'm very happy to say that some of this knowledge actually was developed in collaboration with Natalie Harms, who was the first speaker here. In fact, you can see there's two manuals here, this training manual to support country-driven gender and climate change. Natalie played a big hand in helping to develop that, and that can be downloaded on the ADB website or at the link at the bottom of the slide right there. And then we just recently developed this mainstreaming gender into climate mitigation activities. This is a publication that came out of some of those discussions with the Gender and Children Working Group in Cambodia, as well as some of our collaborators in Vietnam. And one of the key things that we tried to do in these guidelines that I really would like to feature, and in many ways it meshes well with the slide that Natalie presented, showing the 5-year implementation schedule, a 5-year review schedule for the NDCs, is this 9-step process that we have that demonstrates how to mainstream gender into a mitigation action. And the way that we did this basically is we took some of the general guidance that had been used for NAMAs, for nationally appropriate mitigation actions. And there have been a lot of guidelines on NAMAs that have been developed and shared for countries in general, but none of them had focused on the gender aspect. So what we did is we gender sensitized or made them more gender responsive. And while I'm not going to have a chance to go over all 9 steps, what I will suggest to you is that they follow basically 3 or 4 main clusters of activities. And those 3 or 4 clusters of activities really are sort of around your initial design, and formulation stages, and really the emphasis there is making sure that there's strong alignment between whatever type of climate mitigation actions you're planning and whatever type of gender programs and policies you already have in place. And then also making sure that gender stakeholders are not only in the room when these things are being formulated, but they have both a seat at the table and the voice and the space to articulate gender needs so that they're firmly planted into the design and the operational procedures of that policy. Then the sort of second cluster of activities focuses more in terms of the implementation and funding. And once again, this is requiring that once you start talking to the Ministry of Finance or you start talking to funders, that gender stakeholders, whether they be women's ministries or non-governmental stakeholders, are both in the room and have an equal place at the table and can articulate their concerns. And then also some of the ways that you're going to measure the impacts of that finance, some of that consideration is placed as much on the GHG impacts and the the efficiencies of the spending, as well as on the equity aspects and the gender aspects. And then the last cluster of activities really focuses on the MRV, the measurement, reporting, and verification, and the follow-up that would be provided, for instance, if this was supported by an international funding agency. And here again, we emphasize a lot in terms of the operational aspects, making sure that the indicators that you use to measure the impacts of your actions have gender aspects to them, and of course that there's gender disaggregated data that's part of the story. So I would recommend it for anybody who is more interested in reading more about this process, once again, to go back to the website that I suggested before. And please also note, for those that are interested in trying to understand how gender can be integrated into a climate funding proposal, there's also a template at the back of the publication that provides some guidance and that drawing a lot upon the Green Climate Fund template. So I'm going to stop there, and I want to thank once again the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak to everybody tonight. Thank you.
Eric, thank you so much. Before you close your presentation, oh, maybe it's already over. I was going to ask you to put up the slide again with the 2 publications on it, with the web address at the bottom. Perfect, thank you, because I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of interest in accessing those tools. Thank you so much. Welcome to anyone who has joined during this second presentation of this webinar from Eric Zussman from the Institute of Global Environmental Studies in Japan. Before that was Natalie Harms from IUCN. And I'm about to give the floor to Carmen Arias Otarola to give us Peru's approach to gender mainstreaming and identification of national climate change priorities. I want to just take a second to remind everyone that participants will be kept in the mute function throughout the webinar, including the question and answer. That is strictly to limit the background noise and connectivity issues. However, please remember to share your questions at any point via the questions function in the control panel, very likely at the right side of your screen. So Carmen, while you are getting set up, and I think your screen is already up there. Thank you so much. I'm going to introduce you just very briefly. Carmen is the Deputy Director of OAS, the Organization of American States, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Lima, Peru. Since 2013, Carmen has served on the Peruvian delegation to the UNFCCC COPS, specializing in gender equality, adaptation, and indigenous peoples. I will interject a personal note. I can't help myself. I have been lucky enough to see Carmen in action and can attest to her being a vital force behind the creation of the Lima Work Program on Gender and other gender-responsive decisions under the process. In previous roles, Carmen has demonstrated commitment to human rights and gender equality while holding positions such as at the Permanent Mission of Peru to the UN in New York and as Vice Chair of UN Women's Executive Board. Carmen, it is so great to have you online, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you to the organizer for giving me the opportunity to present the Peruvian experience in this process, and it's very glad to be here and share with you some of the experience of Peru in the process of elaboration of the National Action Plan on Gender Equality and Climate Change. I guess in order to understand the Peruvian experience, the Peruvian process, it's important to have in consideration our background. In the case of my country, the COP20 in Lima, the preparation and the realization of this meeting mark a turning point in the climate change policies, because it gives us the opportunity to create the internal conditions for advancing in national climate policies. And also during this,
Carmen, sorry, I'm so sorry for interrupting you. I just wanted to ask you to put your presentation in presentation mode, if you can. And if it's a hassle or changing your screen, then no worries, we can follow.
Okay, let me try it. Can you just tell me how to do it, because I don't know how to.
I think you can try clicking the little icon close to the save button. Sorry, my Spanish is not good enough to be able to read your tabs. Forgive me for that. Okay. It's fine. You know what? It's fine. Let's just proceed, because we can see the presentation without any trouble. So go right ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
It's okay. It's okay. You can see the. Oh, let me try this one. No, I guess it's not. Okay, I'm sorry. No,
it's fine. Don't worry. Don't worry about it.
Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry. So as I was saying, during the COP20 presidency, we decided to promote the gender equality and climate change actions, and we identified this like one of the priorities. It was not quite easy, I have to say, because even for decision takers, they didn't see at that time very clear what the relation between climate change and gender equality was, because for some of them the link between adaptation measures and climate change was clear, but for them they didn't see the relationship between, for example, mitigation actions and climate change. As some of you have mentioned, this is not sometimes it's not quite clear for the decision makers. So I guess we need to take in consideration the political momentum that Peru have had in order to develop a national action plan on gender equality and climate change. One of the issues that we have to take in consideration was, as I already mentioned, the preparation towards the COP20 in Lima, that give us an opportunity to strengthening our national capacities and creating awareness in the public sector about the importance of the link between gender and climate change. Also, during the COP20, civil society played an important role, not only creating awareness, but also disseminating information for the public in general about the relationship between climate change and gender equality, and this was very important. Also, help a lot to have a right international context to help us to develop a national action plan, because in the COP20 we have our decision on Lima Work Program on Gender that invited parties to promote gender sensitive in developing and implemented climate change policies. So I have to say that all these situations give us the opportunity to create a space in Peru for having the opportunity to discuss and to knowledge more about gender equality and climate change, and not only in the public sector, also in the civil society and the public in general have the opportunity to have this space for discussion. So I don't know if you can see the presentation clearly. I'm sorry.
We can see it fine. Yeah, don't worry.
You can see it? Okay, thank you. So I would like to say that we have some enabling conditions in order to develop our action plan on gender and climate change. So we have political will because we have the commitment at high political level from the Minister of Environment and from the Minister of Women. They were involved in this process. Also, we had solid legal foundation because we already have a national strategy on climate change, and also we have a national plan on gender equality that recognizes the relationship between climate change and gender equality. Also, we have the institutional structure at the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Women, and this help a lot in order to develop the national action plan. At that time, we have also prepared and committed professional staff in both ministries that were committed with the elaboration of the action plan. And one thing that I have to mention, that we receive technical and financial support from the international cooperation in order to develop the action plan. IUCN was one of the main supporters in this process, for example. The process of the preparation for the National Action Plan on Gender Equality and Climate Change in Peru was a process that lasted 1 year and a half. We started to prepare in a national overview on gender and climate change, what we have in Peru about gender and climate change. We need to know what we already have done about that, and so we take a stock of all this information and we prepare a document. And then we organize a series of workshops, a national workshop and also regional workshops, in order to prepare a second draft. And in this process, we try to involve many actors as possible, different stakeholders, not only public sector, also civil society, academia, international cooperation. We try to make a broad consultation in this process. And also, the Minister of Environment also launched at that time a public consultation about the document, and it was in December 2015. Finally, we have the final draft ready on April 2016, and then the legal adoption of the National Plan on Gender and Climate Change on July 2016. So last year, at the end of the past government of Peru, we adopted the National Plan on Gender and Climate Change. I have to say that also the Action Plan on Gender and Climate Change includes an intercultural perspective because, as you know, we have an important indigenous population in Peru, so we need to include this intercultural perspective also. It was, I guess, a unique participatory process, and as I mentioned, it involves not only national consultation with representatives of ministries, also with civil society, also with people related to the academia and international cooperation too. And we define in this process 8 main areas that we need to prioritize, and they are forests, water resources, food security, energy, waste management, education, health, and risk management. For example, in the case of energy, one of the activities that we have contained in the plan is to incorporate gender perspective in the design of and implementation of the projects and programs related to reduce greenhouse gases in the energy sector. During the process of elaboration of this this plan of action, I guess we have the opportunity to know good practices, to know about good experiences. And for example, in the case of energy, we have inspiring projects and inspiring stories about how the use of renewable energies have created benefits for women and for their families, how these renewable energies have changed their life. And for example, now they can have access to electricity, they can have access to hot water, and they can have clean cookstoves. So we have the opportunity to know about this good experience, and we have also the opportunity to replicate them in other areas of Peru. One thing that I guess it was very important in this process was that during the process of the elaboration of the action plan of gender, at the same time we also were preparing our INDC, the Peruvian INDC. And this process was in certain way interlinked because the momentum that was created during the preparation of the action plan on gender and climate change give us the opportunity to incorporate in the Peruvian INDC a clear mention about gender equality, and that the Peruvian INDC recognized the importance of the gender equality is a cross-cutting issue. And this is very important because it's not anymore only restrained to the adaptation area. It's to all climate change policies, mitigation and adaptation policies. So I guess there is an interesting interlink between the action plan on gender and climate change and also the Peruvian INDC. However, I guess in the case of our national action plan, we need to keep the momentum because our action plan, as I mentioned, was adopted by the previous government. So this government has the responsibility to implement this national action plan on gender equality and climate change. So we need to create a kind of joint mechanism for the implementation. But we need to put the national action plan into action. We need to make it real now. And this is the challenge now. I also consider that in this process of implementation, we need to consider the participation of civil society. In certain way, the civil society should be part of this process of implementation. And also for the implementation, we are going to need also support of the international cooperation. One of the first things that I mentioned in the presentation is that in order to develop a national action plan on gender equality and climate change, we need a kind of enabling environment. And I have to say that for this phase of implementation, we need the same. We need political will. We need institutional mechanism, institutional arrangement. We need also capacity building because many of the officers in the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Women are new officers that they need to understand the relationship between climate change and gender equality. And also in this process, we need also international cooperation. So we have a very interesting process of elaboration and preparation of the national plan on gender equality and climate change. But now our challenge is the implementation, the put into practice. Thank you so much.
Great, Carmen. Thank you so much. We're just gonna shift screens for a second here. Excuse me for 1 minute while this gets organized. I think there we go. Okay. So thank you so much, Carmen. Thank you very much. That was such an interesting presentation. Some questions have started to come in. and I have some questions, which I might throw into the mix if we have time. And a reminder again to use the questions function in the control panel to send any questions that have occurred to you, either to individual participants, individual speakers, or just to the group. To begin with, a specific question that's geared towards Eric, but actually I think it would be interesting to hear from Carmen on this as well, and maybe you, Natalie, as well. It'd be interesting to hear what your reaction is. The question is this. In the workshop, Eric, that you facilitated, was there a particular priority area that served as, or that became the quote-unquote easiest entry point for integrating gender, or for highlighting gender interlinkages or what have you, for example, forests or agriculture or another sector-specific issue? And on the flip side, maybe where were the biggest challenges? And Carmen, since I know you put up your list of priority areas, I wonder if you want to reflect on the same.
Hey, yeah, thanks very much for that question, Kate, and from the questioner. Yeah, so this is an excellent question. And in the particular workshop that you saw the slide from, so this was in Cambodia. This was with the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, Fisheries. I think what you're, so I think the question is trying to get at, what sectors seem to be the most, have the most potential in those discussions. And
maybe as the saying goes, the low-hanging fruit kind of a thing.
Yeah,
maybe.
Right. Well, exactly. And in this case, so as I mentioned, we were already working on pilot projects focusing on cook stoves. So we were trying to look beyond cook stoves just to see what else was out there. And they were very interested in working on biogas. And this was largely because Cambodia has a national biogas program already in place, and the program is already run largely by the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries. So there's a lot of familiarity already there with this sector and that type of technology. Having said that, while we definitely explored that area and developed a concept note based upon a gender-responsive approach to biogas, we also worked with them on solar drip irrigation, which had both a mitigation and adaptation dimension to it. And that was a much newer area for them. But I think that newness also created a little bit more energy because or more interest because it wasn't something they had done before. So those are two areas that were where we did a lot of work in the workshops, but then it gets to the point of your sort of challenges. And two significant challenges arose. One of them was that in terms of working at the national level, in terms of national climate policy, in Cambodia, the Ministry of Environment is in charge of the NDC process, and so they act as sort of a focal point for the other ministries. And so that means for this Gender and Children's Working Group to get their ideas integrated into national climate policy, it means they have to go through their own ministry. And a lot of times it was challenging to get the attention of the technical working group on climate change in their own ministry. And a lot of times they would use us as sort of international advocates to set up meetings within their own ministry. And so that remains a challenge. The other challenge is trying to get basically support from other climate agent or other international organizations that work on climate change besides the Asian Development Bank. who was supporting this project. There's still, as Carmen was referencing, even with a lot of the pickup in terms of UNFCCC, there's still a lot of or limited understanding of the linkages between climate and gender mitigation, and trying to explain that to potential donors is not an easy thing to do all the time. And so I think there does need to still be increased awareness raising and a lot of activities like the ones that are being described here to continually raise those awareness levels. So the types of things that we're doing don't necessarily have to seem so innovative and can be more mainstream. So I think those are two answers to your questions.
Thank you, Eric. Carmen, did you want to chime in on any thoughts, particular areas in the workshops that you felt were sort of the quote-unquote easier entry points for gender versus the more challenging areas?
Yes, I guess one of the easy entry points in our experience is forests, because and I have to say that this is because of the also because many indigenous women were attending to these kind of workshops, and they feel they're responsible with the forest and with the environment, and this relation with the forest is also linked with the traditional knowledge, with the traditional with the intercultural issues. So it was an easy entry point, I think, the responsibility of women in preserving the forest, in preserving the environment and the biodiversity. So it was easy for them to understand the link between climate change and gender equality, and also give us the opportunity to strengthen other issues like intercultural approach, for example, bilingual education in the case of indigenous women, and other kind of aspects. And I guess the most difficult entry point can be to understand the link in, for example, in the management of waste, or the waste management, or also the use of energy. Is more difficult for them to understand the link than in other areas like forest or adaptation and climate change.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question, I think, Natalie, this is probably geared mostly towards you, but perhaps Eric might weigh in as well. Let's see. Didn't hear too much about specific gender methodologies in the NDCs. Do such methodologies exist? For example, specific strategies maybe employed by the NDCs or reflected in the NDCs? Are you aware of very specific gender methodologies?
Yes, that's a very good question. Not an easy answer though, because to be very honest with you, this is something that we're all still figuring out. So NDCs are so new. Most of them have just been, they just dropped the I, so they've been converted from the INDC to NDCs. There is actually there are a lot of INDCs and now also NDCs that mention women specifically, and also gender equality, and sometimes also women empowerment. Most of them, as we have had sort of in strategies and plans before, link women to adaptation, but some of them do recognize women as agents of change who need to be empowered to really to sustainably actually move towards our climate change targets. Now, when it comes to methodology, that's also, what kind of NDC methodology do we have? These are now sort of new plans or kind of roadmaps that countries develop in a continuous cycle that will guide the way that they implement their climate change policy making. So basically, a lot of the methodologies that we already have will continue to exist, but will then be poured into this frame. So there's not like an easy answer to this. There's not a manual that says, okay, so here's the methodology of how to implement NDCs, and this is the role that gender equality plays in there. We're still talking about a number of actions and policies and programs that we had before that now sort of fit into these puzzle pieces. And there's still, as Eric mentioned before as well, there are processes that we still need to take, as in, looking at what is the institutional structure, taking stock of what mitigation, adaptation actions are already out there. A big part will also be, how do we consolidate these plans, And one huge challenge that we still face, but that we might actually be able to tackle now that we have this kind of framework and this need to continually update NDCs, is that we need to collect data on what is really going on out there. So this also does include sex disaggregated data, looking at what is really, who is doing what in which sector, which contributes to climate change, energy use, all of these things. So most of the methodologies that we need to use in the future, we already have. They're out there. But now we need to put these puzzle pieces together. And what the NDCs might be able to change now is that they provide sort of a momentum and a framework for a range of stakeholders and actors from different ministries, on the international and the regional and the national level, to really go and look at, take stock, see what they can do, what they need to do, and then figure out how they're going to do it. But a lot of this process is very much sort of learning by doing, and there's a lot of need to exchange on, how are other countries converting what they want to do into actual plans. But yeah, I can't give you sort of a happy, go to this website, you'll find the perfect methodology answer, unfortunately. But maybe Eric has something more specific that he can add on this. I'm not sure whether that was actually helpful at all, I'm sorry.
No, I think that was really helpful. Eric, do you want to add something quickly on that question?
Yeah, sure. So to sort of reiterate what Natalie is suggesting, there's not sort of one gold standard NDC out there that demonstrates point by point what methods you would use to integrate gender into the development and the implementation and the financing and the monitoring and review. That's part of the reason we developed the guidelines we developed. Having said that, there are some examples of climate actions on the mitigation side that have some elements of these aspects. And so, for instance, if you're looking for something in terms of stakeholder engagement and consensus building, especially in the formulation stages, you can look at the NDC from Jordan, which has some of that described in the NDC itself. And while I wasn't in Jordan while this was being developed, from what I understand, there was a significant effort to reach out to some of the women's agencies and other gender stakeholders to make it gender responsive. And then in terms of some of the more implementation side of things and performance indicators, these are not NDCs, but could be part of NDCs. If you take a look at there's a NAMA, nationally appropriate mitigation action from the island of Vanuatu on rural electrification, and this was developed, I think, in collaboration with UNDP. And if you read through the documentation, it has a pretty good indication of how you would do the performance indicators, how you would set the objectives and targets from a gender responsive perspective, not only in terms of the climate and the clean energy, but also the gender pieces. Similar thing you could find in terms of NAMAs. There's a NAMA for the country of Georgia, which also focuses on solar water heaters, that has a lot more on the implementation aspects. That would be sort of a useful model. So, yeah, that's all I have.
Okay, thanks, Eric. That's really great, and my ear perked up when you said the Jordan example. I think that's an interesting one to flag, and maybe people can go back and take a look at that. There are quite a few interesting questions that are coming in now, and we only have about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to summarize a couple of things in sort of comment form, and then pose maybe one last question, and then invite each of you to take one last moment for a key takeaway. I think this was clear throughout all of the presentations, the importance of this strengthening of institutional arrangements, cross-ministerial coordination. It would be interesting to know, for example, if any of the NDCs specifically reflect the involvement of women's or gender ministries or agencies directly involved, and include them as partners in implementation. Let me pause on that for a moment. a question around, for example, the importance of civil society participation and involving women building technical capacities where necessary to be able to engage in national working groups effectively. I think that was kind of geared towards you, Eric, maybe lessons in best practices. Really interesting example you highlighted of the opportunity for that formal seat created for the Lao Women's Union. I'm going through these quickly because we're not actually going to have time to answer all of them. And then a couple of things for you, Carmen, in particular. You raised a really important point about the enabling conditions that are available to Peru, including, for example, the political will and committed and professional staff. Very specific question. How did those come about? What were the drivers? Were they developed along the way through this process? And I will add something to the end of that. What would a country do if those enabling conditions were not in place? What would be the entry points? I'm going to just open the floor for a minute. Carmen, if you want to answer those specific climate change gender action plan questions first, and then maybe if we have time, Natalie and Eric, you could weave some thoughts into your final takeaways. Carmen?
Okay. I think in the case of Peru, as I told you before, we have the adequate environment to develop the National Action Plan on Gender and Climate Change. However, it was not simple because at that time we need to create awareness on the public sector and also, as I mentioned, also the civil society play an active role in all the process. However, this process of preparation needs to be we prepared the action plan, and we already adopted the action plan on gender and climate change, but now we need to implement, and we have a new government now, and we also need to have all the same support and the same conditions that we have in the process of preparation, of elaboration, in order to put into action the action plan. So I guess it's a constant process that we need to have. We need now to invest in the capacity building of the public sector, and also in creating the momentum for the implementation also.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have just a couple minutes left now, so I'm going to go back to you, Natalie, and ask you for a minute or two of the last messages you want to relay to the audience. Maybe if you want to say something about the engagement of the women's ministries, that would be great too.
Okay, great. Maybe I'll start with that last bit. When it comes to what we've already seen in INDCs and NDCs, there's a couple of studies that actually look exactly at, how have women been mentioned. So I know there's a UNDP study that you could find online, and then that really summarizes which countries are saying what. And I know that there are a couple of countries that also specifically not only mention women, but highlight the importance of including women in decision making. So in the UNDP study that I'm thinking of, that's actually been recognized by 8 countries that they looked at, so there might be more actually. And a lot of this focuses on sort of adaptation and environmental management, but a lot of it also on energy and planning for climate action. So for example, Costa Rica mentions specifically the importance of the participation of women in policy making and climate action. So you can have a look at their INDC if you wanted to see an example. And there's quite a few INDCs in Africa that I know of that also highlight the participation of women in programs and in training, and they focus very much on sort of the energy sector and sustainable agricultural production, so have a look at that. We've already mentioned the INDC or the NDC from Peru and from Jordan. I know that Liberia also references a gender action plan directly in its NDC. So we have, it's a very complex landscape of, but it is recognized a lot of the time as part of the Sustainable Development specific goals, but gender equality is recognized as one of the things, just like climate change, that needs to be sort of integrated and mainstreamed across everything that we're going to do in the next couple of years. And one very important part of that is breaking out of, and this is now moving into my sort of lessons learned, that we need to break out of our silos. So this is, silos of we're working on gender, we're working on climate, we work on sectoral issues like energy. We need to break out of those if we really want to move forward to reach these collective goals. So we can only reach them if ministries talk to each other, and it's not just the Ministry of Environment who talks about NDCs. The Ministry of Finance talks to multilateral development banks, and then there's maybe a women's agency that sort of isn't at the table at all. But we need to break out of these silos and create institutional structures where everybody sits at this table together, and we can identify which priorities are on the table, what is our goal, and what can we do to reach this goal. And then to really find pathways that take into account the prioritized mitigation and adaptation and development actions, and that really consolidate these different plans. Now that is incredibly difficult, but if we don't do that now, then we can't sort of set off on this path to reach this common goal of staying below 2 degrees. So all of us have that same goal now, completely independent of whether we work in sustainable development or gender equality or climate change. One important part is talking, to each other across ministries and out of our silos. And then this can be actually a great opportunity because we now have a framework where we might be able to do this. So much from my side.
No, that's great. That's great. Thank you so much. Eric, it's getting so late for you, so let's just make it a quick 30-second last thought. Eric, did we lose you?
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a few quick take-home points. So in terms of capacity building, I just think I want to emphasize that too frequently in this business, I think we do capacity building in sort of one workshop, and I think what we found from our project is it's a continuous process that needs to go on for years. 3 or 4 years was perhaps not sufficient even. So I think we need to have a continuous investment in capacity building to make sure that these things work. The second point I'd like to raise is in terms of the gender aspect, I think we need to emphasize women as not only being, a lot of times we emphasize too much women being victims of climate change, and especially in the mitigation space, we need to think of them as agents of change and as valuable participants in contributing to mitigation. I mean, approximately half the world could contribute to mitigation that's not really getting the type of attention they should be getting. And those, I think those 2 points are really important, so I'll leave it there.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much. So we're breaking down silos, we're committing to continuous capacity building and positioning women and gender equality as agents of change. I love it. And Carmen, just a couple last thoughts quickly from you, if you'd like. Carmen? I think you might still be on mute.
Sorry?
No, go ahead. Okay, now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And we still need raising awareness between the link between the link of gender equality and climate change in all the policies and programs that we are going to implement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, everyone, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the webinar. We are very grateful on behalf of all of the organizers. I would like to thank you all for participating. A huge thank you to our incredibly knowledgeable and wise panelists. We really appreciate your presentations. Thank you, USAID, for the support and the partnership under the auspices of Gecko and other efforts. I would like to remind everyone that this webinar is recorded, and you can find it very easily on our website, genderandenvironment.org/energy. I'm sure you'll also be able to find it for a period of time on the homepage. All of the presentations will be available for download, And a reminder that we do have handouts available associated with this webinar. Contact information is up on the screen at the moment, and we very much welcome any of you, all of you, to be in touch. Thank you all so much. Thank you to my dear colleagues, Maria and Maggie, and to Ana, who couldn't join us today, but who is the mastermind behind these webinars. Thank you all so much, and have a fabulous night or day, as the case may be. Bye.